Okay. Hey everyone, I see that we are live. Welcome. I'm just going to get the chat under my eyes so I can follow what you guys say. Awesome. So feel free to say hi in the chat. Tell me if everything is working all right. So as usual, we're going to wait a few moments for everyone to join. I hope you guys are doing great. We are right on time this time, which is great. I'm going to share the link to our Telegram group, as always. It's the place to be, where you can join us to discuss between sessions about various topics. So yeah, feel free to join us there. It's where we'll share news ahead of sessions. We can discuss topics. We can see what is interesting for you, what you want to deal with in live sessions, and all this kind of stuff. So yes, please feel free to join us. We're starting to be a few dozens over there, which is great. So take a seat, grab a cup of tea, coffee. I don't know what time is it where you are. Where I am, it's a bit late for coffee if I want to sleep. But yeah, and so as maybe a reminder, what is Plumbee Labs Lightning? It's two things. It's a Telegram chat, Telegram group, as I mentioned earlier, and it's a community, and it's a bi-weekly live session where we keep track of recent developments in the Lightning Network ecosystem. It's as the name implies, it's a lab, so it's sometimes quite technical, but anyway, the idea is to take a look at some specific technical aspects of how the Lightning Network protocol works and all this kind of stuff. And the idea is also to be able to contribute to the ecosystem through projects. It can be research projects, it can be tools that we develop, it can be presentations about some stuff that are maybe not so well known and that you want to explain better to everyone. It can be this kind of stuff. And so I'm usually the one that is doing the animation for the sessions, but I'm saying this again, I would love to have you propose some interventions, join me live on stage if you want. So really, it's up to you to join me on stage if you want to deal with a specific subject that you find really interesting, or this kind of stuff. Great. So I see that it's now 4:05, so we're going to start with today's session. What's on the menu? So 2 weeks ago in the live sessions, I proposed two exercises, two hands-on exercises with a bit of code, where the goal was to illustrate and better understand something that we delved into during the last session, so 2 weeks ago, which was how we can use proxies, so Lightning node proxies, in order to increase privacy on the Lightning Network. I think it's especially true for receiver privacy, which is the privacy that is the least protected and enforced by basic design of the Lightning Network protocol anyway. So it's great that we have this kind of tools to make receiver privacy a bit better. And so we're going to take a look at some solutions to this exercises. So if you have had the time to take a look at the exercise and to propose a solution of your own, feel free to present it. It would be really nice. You can drop a message in the chat or on the Telegram group, in the live chat channel, and it will be my pleasure to send you a link so that you can join me on stage to present your solution. But I've written a simple solution to the exercise so that you can see how it could be done, and I will of course push the solutions to the GitHub repository of the exercises we do in the lab after the session. We'll take a look at a few implementation releases, the Lightning implementation releases, namely LND and LTK, which are two of the, let's say, four most prominent Lightning implementations. And so in LTK, it was interesting because there were two subsequent releases in the last 2 weeks, which each fixed vulnerability in the LDK, one of which was quite, let's say, easy to trigger, to exploit, and the other was much more edge case, let's say. And then we'll talk about some discussions that occurred in the Lightning ecosystem in the last 2 weeks, one of which is the compromise the balance between latency and privacy in Lightning, and especially when it comes to what we call attributable failures. We will take a look at that in a moment, and at the discussions that Clark Cohen started on Delving Bitcoin Forum, I think it was last week, maybe the week before. And we'll take a look at some numbers and some new products I found interesting in the space of Lightning Yield. But yeah, it will be quite quick. Basically, the two main subjects of today are the review of the exercises and the implementation releases. And for the rest, it will be much more of an ongoing discussion and exploration of what we can find online. So for the Polar exercises, here you have the QR code, which will take you to the exercise. Let me just refresh everyone's mind around what we are talking about. So these are the slides from 2 weeks ago. So the last session where we dealt with Lightning payment privacy through proxies, and basically we saw how in theory you can have reasonably good privacy on Lightning thanks to onion routing, which is the fact that the source of the payment builds the route that takes the payment from them up to the destination, and nodes that are acting as intermediaries on the route, which we call routing nodes, don't learn anything about who is the recipient and who is the emitter of a payment. And we saw that in practice, it's not really like that. In practice, and especially with LSPs, you can have some degree of information that leaks. And in some cases, it's even possible especially for the LSP, to learn who is the recipient of a payment and who is the sender of a payment. I'm not sure that I'm properly sharing my screen, so I'm just going to do it again so that you can see my screen. I'm sorry, I'm in a bit of a different setup than usual. But yeah, we'll make it work. Let me share my screen again. All right. Yeah, this time it should work. Great. And so, of course, custodians know everything. And the idea is that using a proxy, you can hide the receiver, the destination of a payment, quite efficiently. And in some cases, you can even hide the sender. But in the case of the sender, it takes at least some critical mass of adoption in order to break heuristics that network observers can use in order to determine who is the sender. So we'll focus on the blinding of the recipient part, because it's really where it's the most efficient, and it's really an individual level. It doesn't take any critical mass adoption to achieve some additional privacy for the recipient. And so we saw last week, 2 weeks ago, sorry, last session, that there are mainly that there are now two, let's say, protocols to gain privacy, receiver privacy through proxies. One of them, which is the oldest one, is LNProxy. And the other one, which was the novelty 2 weeks ago, is Lightning Glider, which was proposed by SuperTestNet. And so we see that they look kind of similar, but also not that much. There are a few differences, but both use other invoices at some point, which are wrapped invoices. So basically, a party creates an invoice, and the other party creates another invoice that reuses the same hash as the original invoice, but only the creator of the original invoice knows the pre-image, basically, at first. And so the big difference between LNProxy and Lightning Blender is in where it is which entity creates the original invoice and which entity creates the wrapped invoice, which is the other invoice from this original invoice. So in LNProxy, the user is creating the original invoice and the proxy is creating the wrapped invoice, whereas in Lightning Blender, the user is just stating the amount they want to receive to the proxy, and then the proxy creates the invoice, and the user creates a wrapped invoice from this invoice, which uses the same hash as this invoice here. And so the idea, the exercise that I posed to you was to try to write some scripts and to execute them in a local Lightning Network environment, which we can do easily with a tool called Polar, which we presented a few sessions ago, to demonstrate how this works and to get a better understanding of how this works. So let me stop this sharing, and I need to start Polar because I didn't do it ahead of time, sorry. All right. And I'm going to share my entire screen. It will be easier. Share screen. No. So if you remember Polar, it allows you to create local Lightning environments. And so you can see that we created a few already. And I'm going to go straight to the one I created to demonstrate the exercises, which is this one. And so as you see, it's a fairly simple network. So maybe just quickly we can go to the exercise. So you can find it here. So on my GitHub. Maybe at some point it will be on Plan B Networks GitHub. For now, it's a repository on my GitHub. And you can see I created the exercise for payment processing 2 weeks ago. So here we just state again what I just said. And the idea is so for LNProxy and for Lightning Blinder, to design a Polar network of 3 to 4 nodes, one sender, one LSP, which is optional, one proxy and one receiver, and then write a basic script to illustrate how the proxy can obfuscate the receiver node identity from the sender and the LSP if you create a network with an LSP. And so I hinted to the fact that you can use the create hodl invoice method of the Lightning package, between being a node package that we've already used in previous exercises, and which comes quite handy for dealing with LND nodes. But of course, you can use any of the package you want. especially if you're using nodes that aren't running LND, then you'll have to use other packages. And then each time you a few questions to know what to look for. And so one of the questions was, one of the nodes needs to run a specific implementation as of mid-2025, which and why? So this is because you need to be able to create hodl invoices, which is only supported by LND as of today, I believe. Hey, Yolu, welcome. And so you can see here, no, sorry, not what I wanted to show you. You can see here that I indeed created a network with 4 nodes. So in this case, I kept the default names that Polar uses. So Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave. And they're all LND nodes, all connected to the same Bitcoin backend. We don't care in this case. And they all have a channel. So Alice with Bob, Bob with Carol, Carol with Dave. So this forms a route, a path from Alice to Dave. And so Dave will, for example, be our receiver, and Alice will be the sender. Bob will be the LSP, but we won't bother too much with it for now. And Carol will be the proxy that Dave uses in order to obfuscate that the payment is being sent to him. So the idea is to hide the fact that Dave is the final recipient and to make it so that Alice or Bob think that the payment is actually for Carol, whereas it is in fact for Dave. And so there we go. I created here I created 2 solutions, which I'll share later. One for the LNProxy protocol and one for the Lightning Blinder protocol. Here you can find again the README. As in previous cases, you can find here the config file, which basically takes the connection details from the various nodes. So for example, if I click on Dave, that's something we saw earlier, but you can see that you can, so the network needs to be started in order to have access to this. So let me start the network. Here you go. And you can see that you have connection details, which is basically how the script that you write will interact with the node. And so here I have a small test Lightning Network running on my computer. So with fake Bitcoin, it's what we call a rec test. So it's like a local testnet, if you wish, if you want. And so we'll start with the LNProxy protocol. So as a reminder, how does the LNProxy protocol works? Let's take a look at the slides from last week. We see that first the user, so in our case here, the user is the recipient. So it will be Dave in our example. So they want to receive money, so they create an invoice. And so they are the one creating the original invoice in this case. So they know the pre-image from the start. They send the invoice to the proxy. The proxy takes the invoice and creates what we call a wrapped invoice, which is an invoice that reuses the same hash as the original invoice, which means that it can be unlocked with the same pre-image as the original invoice, the same secret. And once the proxy has responded with a wrapped invoice, the user sends the wrapped invoice to the sender. And the sender then pays the wrapped invoice. And so pay means in this context that they send a payment, a HTLC, on a route that goes to the destination of the wrapped invoice, which is the proxy in this case. And so it might, if they use a LSP, for example, the HTLC will go through the LSP and the LSP will extend an HTLC along the route as usual. But now the proxy, if they want to claim the payment from the sender, they can't right now because they don't know the pre-image, because the pre-image was generated by the user. And so the only way for the proxy to learn the pre-image is to pay to extend an HTLC in turn to the user in order to learn the pre-image. And so the proxy sends an HTLC to the user, and the user who wants to get paid reveals the pre-image in order to unlock this HTLC, and it reveals the pre-image to the proxy, and now the proxy knows the pre-image, and so they can settle the wrapped invoice. But what is interesting here is that to the sender, to the LSP, to any node that was participating in the route that paid the wrapped invoice, they don't know, and they can't really know that the final destination was the user. Even if they could see somehow the route, for example, through by inferring the length of the route, or because they are like, for example, like Fanis and like async, they compute the route on behalf of the user. All they see is that the one being paid is the proxy, and they don't see that the proxy also extended an invoice payment HTLC to the user. And so we can create this in a little script in our local Polar environment. You can see that it's quite similar here. And so LNProxy here, let's take a look at what this will look like. Let me hide some stuff so that it's easier to read. Awesome. So let's enter our main function. What do we do here? So we just, here we ask the user to create an invoice and to give it to the proxy. Then once we have the user, the invoice, sorry, we take it, and then we create, so we, in this case, is Carol. So with Carol's node, we create a hodl invoice that has the same hash as the user invoice. And then we subscribe to payment of the invoice. And yes, so and so the proxy subscribes to. Let me get this straight. So if there is a user invoice, the proxy, so Carol, creates a hodl invoice, and then we use subscribe to invoice in order to subscribe to the different updates of the invoice. So each time something happens to the invoice, it's being paid, it failed, or the payment succeeded, or this kind of events, it will be counted by the invoice subscriber here. And so what's important here is it's Carol which subscribed to her own hodl invoice. And so this we subscribe to the event where the invoice is updated. And so then we need to take a look at what the event is exactly to know what is happening to the invoice. And so invoice is held means that an HTLC has been offered for this invoice, but it hasn't been settled yet. And so this means that the hodl invoice has arrived, has been sent by the recipient to the sender, and that the sender has begun the payment of this hodl invoice. So basically, there are HTLCs on the route between the sender and the proxy, which is Carol in this case. And so once Carol, the proxy, sees that there are HTLCs that she's receiving an HTLC paying for this invoice, the proxy will then try to pay the original invoice from the user. So that's what we're doing here. We're using the subscribe to pay via request method, which basically initiates the payment of an invoice and subscribes to new states of the payment. So once again, basically the idea is that every time the payment changes state, so basically the HTLC has been claimed or the payment failed or things like that, we get an event on our subscriber. And here, once the payment is confirmed, it means that the user claimed the HTLC. And so now we know the pre-image, and we can settle, so the proxy can settle the hodl invoice using this pre-image, so what is called the secret here. And once it's done, so basically once invoice is confirmed, which follows the fact that we settled the invoice, the payment is complete and we can stop our program. So let's take a look at this. Let's try to run it. So I run tsx src proxies LNProxy.solution.ts. Here you go. So it will ask me for an invoice. And so this invoice is basically an invoice from Dave, which we will pass to the proxy Carol. So let's create the 10,000 sat invoice. Create invoice, copy and close. So here I paste the invoice. Here you go. And so Carol, so the proxy created an invoice, a wrapped invoice, which uses the same hash as the original invoice we just pasted. And so basically can be unlocked with the same pre-image. So I'm going to copy this wrapped invoice, and I'm going to try to pay it with Alice. So here you go, pay invoice, and it should arrive, hopefully. Yeah, here we see that we have successfully paid the 10,000 sats invoice. And we can see that our program terminated. First, the recipient, so they claimed the payment by claiming the HTLC from Carol. And then Carol, because she learned the pre-image, was able to claim her own HTLC, and then the payment was settled through Bob up to Alice. What we can see here, if we take so this invoice, the wrapped invoice, which Carol created, so I'm copying it, and if I go to a website like Lightning Decoder, there you go. So Lightning Decoder is basically a website where you can paste things like invoices, stuff like that, and it will decode, like the name implies, and present you what is the content of the invoice. And so we can see that, as I mentioned, the chain is a rec test. The amount is 1,005,000 millisatoshis, so basically 10,005 satoshis, which is the 5 come from the fact that we allowed the proxy to take a little fee. Here, when the proxy creates the hodl invoice, the amount is the amount that the user, the recipient, wants to receive, plus 5 satoshi, which is the fee that the proxy takes. So in this case, it means that the one paying the fee, the proxy's fee, is the sender, but we could also imagine that the recipient, so Dave, creates an invoice for a slightly bigger amount than what they actually want to receive, and then this way they are the one paying for the proxy fees. And so what we can see, what is really interesting here, is this payee pub key. So basically, it's a public key of the node which the invoice pays. And so this is the wrapped invoice for that Carol created. And so if we take a look at Dave, we can see that Dave's pub key starts with 03EEFF, which is not what the payee pub key here. But Carol's pub key starts indeed with 0381AB, which is what we find here. So we just check that. And so this wrapped invoice is what is invoice that Alice paid. And so to Alice and to Bob's, which is Alice's LSP, it really is as if they paid Carol and not Dave. And they don't know that the final recipient was Dave, which I hope you was demonstrated with the small example. So that's for the LNProxy solution. So as a reminder, what we saw here is that Dave created an invoice. So we created an invoice using the graphical user interface of Polar. We pasted the invoice in our program. Our program, which was emulating Carol's node, the proxy, responded with a wrapped invoice. And then we copied the wrapped invoice and we paid it with Alice's node using, once again, the graphical user interface from Polar. And we thought that this invoice was paying Carol. And so that's all that Alice saw. She didn't know that the payment and Bob neither went to Dave in the end, which is the whole idea of LNProxy. Now let's take a look at the lightning blinder solution. So we are going to take the exact same network. It really is the same one, but the different participants in this network will not do the same things in this case. So as you can see, it's a bit different. This time, the data that we are going to input in our program is not an invoice, it's an amount. And it's because this time it's not Dave that creates the original invoice, it's Carol, it's the proxy that creates the invoice. And then it's the recipient that creates a wrapped invoice from the original invoice. So that's what we can see here. So this time we are not going to use the graphical user interface in order to pay and receive invoice because it's less practical in this case. So what we do, so we get an amount from the user. So we will see that in a minute. Maybe I can make a demonstration actually. So let's run the program. So proxies, and this time it's Lightning Blinder solution. So it will ask me for an amount that I want. So I, as Dave, want to receive. So let's say I want to receive 12,000 sats. I hit enter. And so what we saw is that the proxy first offered the HTLC to user. Proxy paid wrapped invoice. Okay. Proxy claimed payment with the pre-image. Then we sent this pre-image to the recipient, who is we will see in a minute, and the payment completed. And we see that the sender sent 12,006 sats. So there is one sat that is the fee for Bob, and there is the 5 sats. We see them here again. I don't know where, but somewhere. Where do I create the invoice? Here, create an invoice for the user amount plus 5. And the receiver received what we input as the amount, which is 12,000 sats. So everything seems to work as expected, but let's dive in a little deeper. So what we do here is we just query the receiver's balance at and the sender balance. So Dave and Alice's balances. If we take a look at the network, our receiver is Dave and our sender is Alice. At the beginning of the script, so before anything happens. And so this is our reference for how much sats they each had before any payment took place. Then, as we saw, once the proxy knows the amount that the receiver wants to receive, the proxy creates an invoice for this amount plus some fees if they want to take some fees. So here this is what we do. Proxy LND is created from Carol's connection details. And this invoice, and so it's not an hodl invoice, it's a regular invoice, is for the user amount plus 5 sats. 5 here is the fee that the proxy is collecting for its service. Then we emulate the fact that the proxy gives the invoice to the user, to Dave, and then Dave, once they receive this invoice, they create a wrapped invoice, so a hodl invoice from this invoice. So here we use create hodl invoice because it's the method existed. It's simpler, but it's not strictly picking necessarily a hodl invoice. But I'm not going to go too much deeper on that aspect. And so basically what is important is that it is a wrapped invoice, which means that it is using the same hash, the same ID as the original invoice created by the proxy, so it can be claimed using the same preimage. But this wrapped invoice here is for the amount that the user wants to receive. So it's the amount we input before, so the 12,000 sats. And then we pass this wrapped invoice to the proxy. So Dave gives an amount to Carol, which is a proxy. Carol creates an invoice for this amount plus fees. She gives the invoice to Dave. Dave creates a wrapped invoice from this invoice, so another invoice, but with the same hash. And Dave gives this wrapped invoice to Carol so that Carol can pay it. So Carol sends an HTLC that pays this invoice. But Dave cannot claim this HTLC because he doesn't have the preimage, because Carol has the preimage. And so that's why the invoice is held for some time, because Dave doesn't know the preimage yet. So we are here. Then, once the proxy has extended the HTLC to Dave, Dave can safely give the original invoice created by the proxy to Alice. And so Alice can then pay the proxy's invoice. So as we usually do in Lightning. So that's what we see here. Here we see that, so that's what's happening here. Once, so invoice sub is the user, the recipient, watching the state of their wrapped invoice, which is the one that the proxy paid, so extending an HTLC for. So once the recipient sees that the proxy extended an HTLC, which happens here when the invoice is held is equal to true, then it means that the proxy paid the wrapped invoice, and now we can send the proxy's invoice to the sender. So that's what I just said. Then the sender pays the invoice. So we find again here the subscribe to pay via request. And once the payment is confirmed, it means that now the sender knows the preimage because the payment settled. So it means that Carol revealed the preimage to Bob, which reveals the preimage to Alice. And now it's the part where we lose a bit the atomicity in the payment. Now we need Alice to send the preimage to Dave out of band. So for example, via Noster message or email or whatever. It's better if it's encrypted though. And so Alice sends the preimage out of band to Dave. So here we don't have to create a messaging layer because we can just pass the secret in our script. So once the payment is confirmed, once Alice learned the preimage from the proxy, Alice can reveal the secret to Dave, the recipient, and then Dave can use this secret to settle the payment that Carol extended to him in the beginning. And now that the hodl invoice is settled, the payment is complete, and we wait just a bit for everything to settle, and which is what the set timeout does. And now we can check our balance, so the balance of the recipient and so Dave, and the balance of the sender, Alice, in the end of our little script to check that indeed it matches what we expect. So if I run the program again, for example, with let's say 15,000 sats. Yeah. So let's put 15,000 sats. We see so the proxy offered. So we give the amount to the proxy. The proxy creates an invoice, gives us the invoice. We create as the user creates a wrapped invoice, the corresponding wrapped invoice, and gives it the proxy in order to be paid. The proxy offers an HTLC for this wrapped invoice, but the recipient cannot claim this HTLC yet because they don't know the preimage. The recipient takes the proxy's original invoice and gives it to the sender. The sender pays the proxy. The proxy claims the payment with the preimage, so they reveal the preimage to the sender. The sender sends this preimage to the recipient, and the recipient uses the preimage to settle the other invoice and claim the payment. And in the end, we see that indeed the sender sent 15,000 sats plus fees, and the receiver received the amount that they requested, which is 15,000 sats. And so everything is great. So yeah, I hope it was clear. That's it for the little demonstration. So once again, if you want to get a practical hands-on understanding of what's going on, I think it's a great exercise to do first maybe on your own, and then you can take a look at the solution if you want. But yeah, I will be pushing the solutions to GitHub so that you can take a look later today. Great. Another thing I wanted to share, so let me share my screen again. Here we go. So our implementations releases, because in the last 2 weeks we got actually releases from I think most of the implementations, but some of them are only what we call release candidates, which is not actual release, but as the name implies, release candidates, which is basically code that is still expected to have some bugs. So not a proper release yet, but this way some more power users can try to play with the release candidate, find bugs, and yeah, communicate the bugs to the developers team, and the developers themselves can, of course, use the release candidate and try to find more bugs. So, for example, we had a release candidates for Core Lightning, but we got real releases from LDK and LND. So as I mentioned, maybe we'll start with LND and then we'll take a look at LDK. So LND released actually more versions than that. There was the major version 0.19.0, and then there was a hotfix 0.19.1. And now they are working on the 0.20, I believe. And this was interesting because they did a lot of things. You can check the release notes here. But they added support for the new RBF cooperative close flow, which we covered a few sessions ago, which is called options simple close. And basically, so unlike the old flows, this version now uses RBF, so replace byte fee, to enable either sides to increase their fee rate using their own channel funds. And this replaces the old negotiation logic that could fail with a version where either side can increase the fee on their co-op close transaction using channel byte. So the big difference is that before, the parties that funded the channel had to pay the fee for closing the channel. And this could lead to forced closures, for example, if they disagreed on the fees at the time of the negotiation in order to cooperatively close the channel. And it was a bit of a bummer because usually when both peers are online, you want to be able to do a cooperative close because it's just simpler and it's more efficient in terms of block space. And so it's also usually more efficient in terms of fees. And so with this, each can increase the fee rate of their closing transaction using their own channel funds. But so if you want to take a deeper look at this, you can take a look at the previous session. If you want to know which session it was, you can go to Plan B network here, and you can, let me move this away, you can go to About, Plan B Labs, and here you can see all the sessions that we did already, and this is also where you can see the next session, which is the one we are doing right now. And so let me take a look. It was maybe the 7th session. Oh, so there isn't the details. So it was the 7th or the 8th session, I believe. Maybe the 5th. So yeah, I'll let you take a look at this. Where was my? So yeah, just to say that now it's officially in LND, and there is interoperability with Eclair version 0.12 or more, which is great. And so the interoperability with other implementations is an ongoing work as other implementations roll out support for this option simple close protocol. Regarding the the LDK releases, so we got two releases, 0.1.3 and 0.1.4. You can find here following the QR codes. And so the 1.3 release fixed DOS attack vector that could be used against any LDK-based node that issued both 12 offers. We'll see how it works in a while. But basically, it means that any LDK node that ever created an offer and published it would have been vulnerable to this DOS attack vector. And any other node with knowledge of this offer could trigger the DOS attack. And so basically trigger a crash in the LDK node. So it was quite something. And the other vulnerability, which was fixed in version 0.1.4 of LDK, was in this time an attack that could lead to theft of funds, but which was more of a edge case and would allow in some very specific conditions. So let's take a look at the DOS attack vector first. So it was, as I said, linked to bolt 12 offers and could be exploited by any node. So just as a reminder of what offers are, a bolt 12 offer is a Lightning native persistent payment identifier. So it's a string, a chain of characters, but it can also be represented as a QR code, for example. And so this can be persisted. This can be reused several times, which is in opposition, in contrast to Lightning invoices, Bolt 11 invoices, which are one time, so they expire when they're used, and which have an expiration date. So you can't just print the QR code of an invoice and get paid over and over again using the same invoice. But you can do this with an offer. And the way it works is that you publish the offer, and then any node that reads this offer and supports port 12 can, from this offer, learn what they need to send your node a fetch a request invoice message. So basically, they send this kind of message called onion messages, which travels through the network using some quite similar onion routing to that we use for route payments. And so your node will respond with an invoice, a classic Bolt 11 invoice, on request from any other node that uses this offer to ask for invoice. But so your node will check that the node that requires an invoice requests an invoice from your node will have to prove that they know a valid offer that you created. And so, for example, you can expire offers, which means that you will stop responding to invoice requests for this offer. You can have offers that expire at a certain date and stuff like that. You can have offers that I believe are limited to certain amounts, all this kind of stuff. But if it's a valid offer, basically your node should respond to an invoice request with a valid invoice, which is a classical Bolt 11 invoice, and then the sender will pay the invoice as we usually do the classical way in Lightning. And so the issue here was so that there is a field that the sender can use can add into their invoice request message, which is called the payer node, which is basically some metadata that the payer can add to the node, so to the invoice request. So basically, if you run a shop, it can be useful. It can be used for the person that wants to pay you to include their order number, for example, so that you can track payments in your backend as a merchant, all this kind of stuff. So it's a useful addition, a useful metadata field that can be used for various purposes. The issue was that an attacker or even an honest node could by accident trigger a panic and so crash of the LDK node if the payer node was of a specific size, for example, 560 bytes. So basically it was linked to how this payer node was passed, let's say, by the recipient node. So it was kind of a dumb bug. And now it is fixed. But you can see that it was available for anyone to trigger such a DOS attack due to the fact that it was really just asking for an invoice using a valid offer. So the offer had to be valid for it to work. So if a node if you don't know a valid offer that was emitted, that was created by a node, you couldn't use this attack vector against them. You had to have knowledge of a valid offer, a valid Bolt 12 offer, in order to be able to exploit this. But still, once you had it, you could trigger the attack. That's it for this attack vector, and so you can see here the release notes. So basically, it's what I said: a malicious payer which requests a Bolt 12 invoice from an LDK-based node via the Bolt 12 invoice request message can cause the panic of the LDK-based node due to the way string truncate handles UTF-8 code points. So here it's a more boring part. And the code path can only be reached. So basically, the code path means the part of the code that can be abused can only be reached once the received Bolt 12 invoice request has been authenticated to be based on a valid Bolt 12 offer with the same LDK-based node, which the same LDK-based node issued. So that's what I said in the end, which is basically that for a node to be vulnerable, it had to have issued Bolt 12 offers, and for a node to trigger this panic, they had to have knowledge of a valid Bolt 12 offer for this node. And so that's here you have the if you want more details about the bug. And now the other release from Rust Lightning. So here we have the security fix in 0.1.4. And so if an LDK-based node funds an anchor channel to a malicious peer, so an anchor channel is a channel that uses anchor outputs for commitment transactions. So 2 anchors as a reminder. So we are going to have ephemeral anchors at some point, but for now, an anchor channel means 2 anchors, each of 330 sats. So you create an anchor channel, so it just means that each commitment transaction will have these 2 anchors. And so if an LDK-based node funds an anchor channel to a malicious peer, and that peer sets the channel reserve on the LDK-based node to 0. So the channel reserve is an amount that each node is required to hold by their counterparty. And the idea is that this way, each node always has some skin in the game, because if they try to cheat and the other node punishes them by publishing the justice transaction, then they have at least this amount on their side of the channel, and so they lose at least this amount. But it can be the other counterparty can say that they want you to have a zero reserve, for example. And so in this case, the LDK node could overdraw its total balance upon increasing the fee rate of the commitment transaction. If the malicious peer forwards HTLCs through the LDK-based node, this could leave the LDK-based node with no valid commitment transaction to broadcast to claim its part of the forwarded HTLC. The counterparty would have to forfeit the reserve value. So to understand better this part, we need to take a look at the commit that is referenced. And so basically the issue is that at all times, the funder's balance should cover the commitment transaction fee, so how much it costs to broadcast the commitment transaction, any non-zero value anchors, so the 330 sats anchors we mentioned, and the fundee selected channel reserve. And so prior to this commit, we would allow the funder to dip into its reserve to pay for the 330 sats anchors. So it wouldn't be an and here, it would be an or, kind of. And so the issue was that due to this, you could end up crafting a commitment transaction, and without realizing that you spent more funds in this commitment transaction than what was available to your node at this point. And so you wouldn't realize it at this time, but when you try to broadcast the transaction, so when your node tries to broadcast the transaction using the underlying Bitcoin node, then the Bitcoin node would reject transaction because it is invalid, because it tries to spend more funds than what is available. And so it could lead to loss of funds if you're not able to broadcast your commitment transaction. So it was quite a big, substantial vulnerability as well. So that's it for the LDK vulnerabilities I wanted to cover today. If we go back to our here you go, to our summary. The next thing I wanted to touch on was latency and privacy in Lightning. Let me share again my screen. Talk. So here you can see an post, let's say, that was published by Carla Cohen, which is a Lightning developer. And it's about the latency and privacy in Lightning. So it followed Lightning was spake meeting discussion. So basically, I think it's on Mondays. I think it's every 2 Mondays, there is a Lightning Network spake meeting discussion that is held publicly. So everyone can join the Jitsi call if they want. So in the last spec meeting, there was some discussion on the privacy impact of what we call attributable failures. And so the idea of attributable failures is basically to be able, as the routing node, to learn where my payment failed, at which nodes did the failure occur, in order to, from this information, be able to adjust my routing behavior and to, for example, avoid in the next attempt to go again through some nodes which have been identified as the ones that failed in this specific payment. And so in her post, she does a little recap of the discussion. And so basically, the current version of the spec allows forwarding nodes, so routing nodes, to specify the time they held the HTLC in milliseconds. So how long they had the HTLC, how much time elapsed between the moment they received the HTLC and the moment they were about to settle it. And so it's likely that sending nodes will use this value in the future to pick low latency routes. Indeed, sending nodes usually want the payment to settle as quick as possible. But the problem is that you can use, it's not necessarily very good for privacy to be able to have, if let's say it otherwise, if if routing nodes optimize for payment, for low latency payment, so they complete the payment as fast as possible, then it becomes easier for an observer, either an observer that is part of the route or not, to guess who is paying who, because then you can infer the number of hops more easily. And so that's why it has been envisioned that having a random forwarding delay can improve payment privacy. So she references the boards basically regarding this random delay. Here we go. And so if now we say that we want to surface hold time, so basically we want writing nodes to communicate this hold time, how much time they hold an HTLC, then it might disincentivize them to use this random forwarding delay that improve privacy, because adding a random delay means that their hold times will be bigger, and so will be less good than those or other nodes that don't implement this random forwarding delay. So basically, you have to make a compromise between, do I want to be a privacy preserving routing node and I don't really have an incentive to do so, or do I want to be a very fast routing node? And in this case, I might have an incentive because presumably sending nodes will prefer to pick me when they build their routes, because I seem to be a node with a lower latency. And so the solution suggested in the meeting was to change the encoding to represent blocked time instead, so that the smallest encodable value still leaves time for processing and the random delay. So here there is some discussion about how to encode the time that a routing node had an HTLC. But it's not necessarily the most interesting part. And so here she goes on explaining more context about the tension with forwarding delays and privacy. There are a few research papers already on the subject that she summarized. And so there are two different types of attacker: on-pass, which means a node that is part of routing the payment, and then tries to de-anonymize payments because they are part of the payment. And then there are off-pass. And one example is an autonomous system. So let's say, for those who don't know what an autonomous system is, basically you can see that as an entity, a network operator on the internet that control an autonomous zone of the internet. And if you want to, and so they see inside their autonomous system, inside the autonomous zone, they see who sends the data to who, basically, let's say. And it's they lose some info once data needs to go to another autonomous system, and then they use the border gateway protocol, which, as the name implies, is how autonomous systems communicate with each other, basically in order to send data across the internet. That's what I wanted to. Yeah. And so there is this paper here, which shows how network level actors, such as an autonomous system, can leverage privacy attack in the Lightning Network, and can, by looking at basically network packets, infer who is the sender and who is the receiver, without having to take part in the payments. That is the important part. And so, yeah, she covers both, let's say, de-anonymization vectors with the unpassed adversary, which basically you have to run a Lightning node. You probe the network in order to infer the typical latency of nodes. So you send ping requests and see how much time it takes for nodes to respond. You open low fee and low expiry channels to attract them. So basically channels that seem quite very efficient. And then you record the time in order to try to guess who is the sender and who is the recipient. You record the time between specific messages that are sent when a payment is routed through the network. So in the case of the recipient, you record how much time there is between the update add HTLC message. So they send you this update add HTLC message and this update fulfill HTLC message. And so you use this latency you compare this to the latency estimates to calculate the number of hops the HTLC took. So basically you can see how much time it took for the HTLC to resolve after you. And since you have latency estimates for nodes in the network, you can infer how many nodes there were after you. And so if it was very quick, for example, you can know that the next node is presumably the recipient. If it was not that quick, but it seemed like it was one node more, but you know that it's not the next node, but it's the node after. But even knowing that it's not the next, but the one after, you can still, with some hypotheses, you can still reduce the number of possible recipients. And for example, if you have knowledge, of course, of the public graph. So you can, for example, see which nodes, and you know the next node because it's the only thing, almost the only thing you know with onion routing, but you know the next node. So you can just take a look at the public graph of public channels and see what are the nodes that are connected to this next node. Of course, when it comes to private channels or unannounced channels, things become a bit more complicated, but you can still have some heuristics. And for the sender identification, it only works if the sender retries along the same path. But it's the same idea. This time you record the time between update fail HTLC. So the first time the sender tries to route a payment through you, you fail the first attempt, and then you hope that the second attempt also goes through you, and you compare how much time it took for the fail HTLC message. So when you fail the payments, and the second update add HTLC message, the second attempt, and this gives you an estimate of how many nodes there are between you and the sender. And so if the time between the first failure and the retry is very small, then you can guess that the previous node, and you know who the previous node is because you receive the onion packet from them, and then you can guess that this previous node is the actual sender of the payment. And so the unpath adversary depends on basically, I think, on how much capital they have, how much funds they have in order to be able to open a lot of channels and stuff like that. But it can be quite effective. But it requires committing funds and having at least one, but probably more routing nodes in the network. The off-path adversaries this time, they are just doing what they usually do, but they can ping nodes in the network to get latency estimates. So just ICMP pings, no need to run a Lightning node for that. And so they can just passively monitor network traffic. And the commitment dense for a channel can be identified by message size and direction. So basically, you can see when nodes update add HTLC, update fulfill HTLC, update fail HTLC. You can see this kind of message. You can infer this kind of message by looking at size and direction of the data packets. And with knowledge of the LN graph, you can construct parcel parts by tracing flows of update add HTLC message through the channels observed and things like that. And so without having to be part of the routing of the payments, only by being able to monitor without doing deep packet inspection, but just the size and the direction of packet messages of data packets and a knowledge of the LN graph, they can, to some extent, guess the where the payments come from. Because, for example, the first node to out of the blue send an update add HTLC message is presumably the sender and things like that. They can identify sender and receiver of payments. And so now to mitigations to that. In the case of the off-path adversary, there is something that basically is in the pipeline since a lot of time. So it's something we know we need to do, the Lightning developers know they need to do. It's basically having a constant message sizes in order to obfuscate what message is an update add HTLC message, what message is an update fulfill HTLC message and stuff like that from an external observer that doesn't do deep packet inspection. And so this way it would really reduce this kind of risk. And when it comes to on-path adversary, so where it's more of a timing analysis, here so the issue is really that there is a tension between routing nodes who want to compete on being as fast as possible and nodes that want privacy. And one of the propositions that seems to have gained some kind of consensus is that it should be on the recipient and maybe even also the sender to add some delay if they want to in order to mitigate this timing analysis attacks. And for example, in the case of the recipient, it's really easy to understand. Basically, you just wait a random delay before you reveal the pre-image and so fulfill the HTLC. And this way, you can the routing node that is trying to do the on-path adversary cannot really guess if you're one node away and so you're the recipient, or if you're two nodes away and so you're another recipient. They cannot guess anymore because you added a random delay, and it's a great way to mitigate this because it is the parties that has an interest in being in preserving their privacy that can implement mitigations in order to preserve their privacy. And it's not relying on routing nodes to implement random delays that might not be incentive compatible when it comes to the competition between them and many other nodes, the routing nodes of the network that compete for fast payments. So basically that's the gist of it. If you want, we can maybe in following sessions dive a little deeper into the subject. And another thing I wanted to touch on today before I wrap this up is the notion of yield on Bitcoin, because at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas, we saw the LSPC equal communicate very impressive numbers. And so basically, they communicate that they have 10% APR, so annual yield, on their Bitcoin via Lightning routing payments, which is, if you've ever looked at data from LSPs and routing nodes, really impressive. It's a huge number usually, and we'll see this in a bit. The data show that it's between 1 to 4% APR, so per year, and not a big 10%. So it's interesting. One of the things that is worth noting, and that's the comment of Big Router here, is that a part of this yield comes from the fact that they are the exclusive routing node for Cash App, which is a payment mobile app, which has a dollar and Lightning as well. And so when users of Cash App, which is a custodial solution, want to send, for example, to withdraw sats through Lightning, they need to go through the SQL nodes in order to be able to get to the rest of the network. And this means that the SQL node can charge fees that are maybe bigger than what they could charge if it was open to competition. It's a bit like in Fanis, where the async node, because Fanis wallets can only have channels with the async nodes, the remuneration model of the async node of the async company is that they can take 0.4% fee on payments, and they can do that because you only have channels with the async LSP. And so it's a bit the same here for SQL. And so it's certainly a factor to the fact that they are able to have such a high APR on their Bitcoin, because as we see here with the latest product introduction from Amboss, usually where is it? On Magmart, which is Amboss's marketplace, the API range between 1 and 4%, so we're nowhere near to 10%. And so it was just, because it's basically the same subject, and so I thought it was interesting to touch on this as well. Amboss released Raise, which is basically an automated Lightning node. So if you have a lot of liquidity, and I think it's really tailored for big money. So here, as I mentioned, corporate treasuries and Bitcoin custodians. So people who have a lot of Bitcoin, I think the minimum is 1 Bitcoin. Let's try to find minimum. No, I can't find it, but I think I mentioned it somewhere. You can basically deploy the funds and basically Amboss will handle the node operations for you with strictly limited permissions. So they can only receive on Lightning, open channel and close the channel. They cannot send. So it remains to be seen how it is enforced, but it's something that you can enforce. And using AI-driven insights from their data. So we saw in a previous session that Amboss is basically now a Lightning data company, and they can allocate the the liquidity that you as a big corporate treasury, for example, so as a big holder of Bitcoin, you give them the liquidity, and then they can automatically deploy it into channels where, according to their model, it makes the most sense, and so it will presumably create the biggest yield, and so and you sell channels in the Magma marketplace. Yeah, they estimate 1 to 4% APY. Of course, it depends on how this market evolves and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it can be interesting. It really depends on how it's done, but it's definitely a way where we can see more liquidity being provided on Lightning. And what is interesting with this model is that hopefully, because it relies on some data, the liquidity will be deployed in places where it's actually useful, because that's one of the big point of confusion sometimes when you compare liquidity protocols on DeFi, Ethereum, stuff like that, where basically they have this one metric, which is the TLV, the total locked value. And whereas in Lightning, you have to deploy liquidity, but you have to deploy it in places where it will be used in order to route payments if you want to secure a yield. And so that's where the data aspect of it can be quite interesting, I think. So yeah, that's it for today. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'm going to quickly share again my screen so that you can see quickly the QR code to join the Telegram group if you wish. Here you go. You can scan this QR code. I hope it was interesting. Once again, feel free, if there are some subjects that you want to discuss, either in the group, in the Telegram group, or during live sessions, feel free to drop them in the Telegram chat. I'm really eager to have feedback, to know if there are some aspects that you find interesting that you want to dig deeper together. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining us. Have a nice day, and see you in on the Telegram group, and see you in 2 weeks for the next live sessions. Bye bye.